television team and to give a presentation on my work and on the kinds of things that, as a qualitative researcher, the kinds of quantitative data that would be particularly useful for me, but that I wouldn't be able to collect on my own. And so with that, I was able to really articulate and make sure that the needs and interests of Black Catholics were on the radar of the research team from the very beginning. And so as the project progressed, I was involved with giving feedback on the construction of the questionnaire. And as the data started to come in, giving feedback on that, which led to the parent study, Faith Among Black Americans, which was published last year. And then, of course, giving further feedback as the research team prepared the report that came out last month on Black Catholics.
Wonderful, wonderful. I do want to start here with what I call, when I saw this report, the thing that really bowled me over was kind of the headline, the fact that most Black Catholics do not worship in predominantly Black churches, which is very distinct from Protestants, our Protestant brothers and sisters. Can you tell me a little bit about your reaction to that, and just in general, just talk about that a little bit and what you think that means or has meant or means for the future for our community?
Sure. It was not surprising to me the numbers that we have available to us now as a result of this report. They are, to me, in many ways shocking, but not surprising, because as I said, I've been doing this work for a long time. But in terms of the report and Black Catholics worshiping in predominantly Black parishes, less than 20% of Black Catholics worship in predominantly Black parishes. And for those who are from the large dioceses on the East Coast, like I am, I'm based in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, or the Archdiocese of Chicago, or the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Those of us that are in these dioceses, we are used to predominantly Black parishes existing in our communities. But if we look at the nation as a whole, Black parishes are rare. And so it is not surprising that such a low number of Black Catholics had the opportunity to worship in a predominantly Black parish. And even those dioceses like Philadelphia and Baltimore, and Chicago, and New Orleans that are used to Black parishes, we've seen in these last couple of decades, so many of our Black churches close and merge that we have far less opportunities to worship in that way. And so, we don't have the opportunities to worship in a predominantly Black setting the way that our Protestant brothers and sisters do.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and I know I'll love to hear your story, Tia, where you are in Philadelphia. But here in Chicago, my own story, and really the story of my family, is a migration story. So my grandmother brought Catholicism with her from New Orleans when she came up in the Great Migration, and that then spawned a whole family of Catholics here in Chicago. And they were forced to go. They couldn't go to the white churches, so they went to their own. And so it formed these kind of little ghettos of Black Catholics who, in some cases, could get in certain parishes, but ultimately were forced into all Black churches over time because they weren't allowed in white parishes. And then so we were, even when I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. We went to what I would call a predominantly Black church. There was some others there. But then all of the people in my neighborhood, and this is another story of migration, when the city got a little tough, they started dispersing. And these were people in my neighborhood were middle-class Blacks who were educated, and their children were educated. But when they got educated, they dispersed out to other parts of the city. And so that then meant that they went to, my brother, for example, is in a parish in a suburb that he's one of these in your study where he used to be he grew up in a Black Catholic parish, but now he's he's a minority in a majority parish, and that is so much a story of so many Black Catholics here in the city of Chicago, and it continues. because the city, the migratory patterns of the city is people are moving out now principally because of violence. You see a lot of families moving not just into the suburbs, but out of the city completely. So we have all these sort of migratory patterns which are really impacting the way we worship and where we worship. What do you think are the implications of that for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. My own family story is not unlike yours. My family came to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. My grandfather was a teenager when he moved to Philadelphia from New Orleans, and my great grandmother made the decision that their family needed a fresh start. And so they came to Philadelphia and initially lived in South Philly, eventually moving to West Philly. I spent the first part of my childhood in a predominantly Black parish, a parish that became a predominantly Black parish as the surrounding neighborhood changed, which is a key way that predominantly Black parishes are formed. When I was still in elementary school, my mother and I moved, and we moved to the next zip code, still in West Philly. And I enrolled in the parish school for 7th grade. And I was, in the late 80s, the first Black child to go to that school. I mean, it was a couple of miles, one zip code in an entire world away from where I had spent the first part of my childhood. And that parish where I was baptized and spent those early years, that's corner of West Philly where I spent those early years. There were 4 churches when I was growing up, and now there's 1.
Yep.
So that just gives an indication of the broader pattern. And now, it is not uncommon to have more Black Catholics outside of the predominantly Black parishes than in them.
Right.
Because there's so few that are remaining. And so, this is as far as the implications go, I mean, every time a church closes, there are some folks that just don't move on to another Catholic church, whether they go to a church that's not Catholic or they stop going to church altogether. And so as we see this pattern of mergers and closings over a period of 20 to 30 or even 40 years, it's not surprising that the numbers that are presented to us in this Pew report are what's happening. So, as far as the implications go, our leaders, our diocesan leaders, our school leaders, we have to, first of all, stabilize the hemorrhaging that is happening in our Black Catholic communities. And a key way to do that is to start, looking at our churches in a different way and look at, the role of our churches in the community as anchors, really, in the community, and what happens to the community when those anchors are no longer there. So the decision-making process, has to be reevaluated. The way that we reach out to Black Catholics has to be reevaluated, because all of these things are happening at one time and are having devastating effects on our Black Catholic communities.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's so many threads and insights there, what you just said there. And we're going to take a break in a few minutes, but I want to come back to that in the second half of the show. I do want to just touch on, while we're on this whole issue of kind of the migratory patterns of Black people. Obviously, there's African Americans in the way that we've dispersed in our cities. There's also people who've come in, and there's a great diversity of immigrant Black communities who've come into particularly our urban cities. And that has really changed the face. I mean, one of the things I always say is Black people are not a monolith. We are not just one type. We're actually a great tapestry. And here in Chicago, we have so many strands. We have great Haitian Catholics and Nigerian Catholics, West African Catholics. I could go on. There's a long list of them. I do wonder, in your evaluation of this study, do you feel that was adequately captured? Because sometimes I feel like some of the smaller groups kind of get lost in favor of kind of, yes, there's African Americans and we have our own story, but there's a kind of an ongoing story of all the immigrant communities who are coming here and bringing their Catholicism with them. And actually, it's slightly different brands of Catholicism.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes this Pew report so important, is that it does capture Afro-Latino Catholics and Catholics who are born in Caribbean nations and African nations,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to really incorporate that into the story of Black Catholics, and to say concretely that Black Catholics are not a monolith. The Pew Report is able to tell us how many Black Catholics in the U.S. today were born in the Caribbean, were born in
amazing.
African nations, and so really to incorporate that into the story. What it doesn't do is to be able to narrow that down farther into particular countries, individual countries,
Mm-hmm.
or particular rites. If say participants in the study worship in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, or some other rite of the church. So that's what we don't have.
Right.
But we do have the incorporation of these distinct
of the broader groups,
communities within the broader.
And what a great stride. I mean, we just didn't have a lot of data. I mean, there was some data. I used to search for it, but now we've had this study. There was a study earlier done by Pew as well. And together they give us so much richness that we didn't have before. And yes, there's more we could get, but there's so much here to unpack. And I thank you for your participation in that and putting it together, and also just thank God for the blessing of this research. I want to come back to something that's close to your heart, which is mission. In the second part of this story, in terms of mission in the Black community.
Did you know that Catholic Charities accepts car donations? If you're ready to free up space in your garage and put a stop to all those expenses that go along with owning a car, we will gratefully accept your donation, whether the car is running or not. You choose a pickup time that is convenient for you, and we will make the donation as easy as possible, free of charge. You'll receive a charitable donation receipt as well. We accept all types of vehicles nationwide, and you will know that your donation is made to Catholic Charities, an agency you can trust. To learn more about donating your car, call 877-786-4483. That's 877-786-4483. Thank you.
I am a seminarian.
The church needs compassionate and well-trained priests to help guide each of us through life.
What inspires me, what draws me always to the priesthood, is continue to see priests be a beacon of hope for other people.
You can play a part in the education of these young men as they prepare for a life of service to others.
I want to be that beacon of hope too, and it sets my heart on fire.
To support our seminarians, make your gift at archchicago.org/seminarian fund or call 312-534-7959.
Welcome back, everyone, to Catholic Chicago. I'm Cliff Barber, Director of the Black Catholic Initiative here at the Archdiocese of Chicago. I'm here with a wonderful guest, Dr. Tia Noel Pratt. She's the Director of Mission Engagement and Strategic Initiatives at Villanova University. Welcome back, Tia. You know, we talked a little bit in the first half of this show really about the study itself, the Pew Research study, with the dramatic headline, at least for me, was the fact that a number of Black Catholics have dispersed. We kind of were in Black Catholic parishes, but for a number of reasons you pointed out in the first half, there have been some closures and mergers in our major cities, but also, too, there have been some migratory patterns in our cities that we talked about, our own stories and our families. And we talked a little bit at the end around the implications of that, because there was what Black people brought to the Catholic Church was a unique spirituality. A lot of that in my own family, if I carry on my own story, my mother is Baptist and my father is Catholic. And so when they came together, they merged together two very powerful traditions. And that's actually the story of the Black Catholic Church in many ways. We brought with us many different experiences, spiritual experiences and life experiences from slavery and everything else that we bring with us, that we were able to bring some uniqueness into our Catholicism. And we were able to then blend, if we were in a community, in a church, that really came alive. But when we get dispersed, maybe some of that spirituality gets dispersed. I want to ask you a little bit about that.
Yeah, and that's an important question and an important point to make as we look at how the impact of the loss of so many of our Black churches. And when my grandparents married, my grandmother converted to Catholicism. So she brought those experiences of being raised Protestant to her marriage and to our family. Even as she made the commitment to embrace Catholicism. But as we see folks who grew up in predominantly Black parishes but don't worship in them anymore, either because of mergers and closures or because they have moved to other neighborhoods, what we see is perhaps the loss of some of that spirituality in music, in terms of liturgical practices, in terms of just even aesthetics
style
in the church, which is what a lot of my research focuses on, how Black Catholics incorporate both culture and spirituality into the worship experience through music, preaching, and church aesthetics in particular. And when that is lost for any of these reasons, it can create a feeling of dispersal, a disconnect,
and maybe a loss of identity, maybe a little bit, because there was an identity that was very strong. At least I know as I was growing up, it was a clear identity. But then now, if you're dispersed, it's hard to find that, because you're kind of smaller groups, fragmented, all dispersed across. So it's harder to cultivate. There may have to be new ways to do it. I mean, we saw some during coronavirus where people gathered from different parts to do things online and virtually, so that we get these virtual groups that can kind of almost come together instantly. But it's difficult because we're in different places now.
Yes, it's incredibly difficult, and technology can help, but it's not necessarily a replacement for being together in that shared space for worship, which is so important. So these are things that we have to consider as church, as diocesan leaders and officials, and just the rank and file faithful, and figure out what it is that we need in order to feel that we are worshiping in our best possible way, and that our identity is affirmed and is encouraged, rather than feeling that it's suppressed.
Sure. And T, I want to ask you, we could talk forever on this particular subject, but Christianity is not a competition. We're all helping each other get to heaven, right? And whether we're Catholic or Protestant, my mother's Baptist, I know I'm going to see my mother in heaven, that I'm confident of. So I walk hand in hand with my Protestant brothers and sisters. And so this isn't a competition, but one of the things I think about is, I want to shift to thinking about how we grow the church, grow the Black Catholic Church. For our Protestant, what the research showed is that Protestant churches, or most Black Protestants, tend to worship in all Black or mostly Black or predominantly Black churches, and Catholics don't. That's the headline here. But as we're trying to think about mission and attracting new people, the next generations and so forth, do you think that presents a particular challenge for us as Catholic Christians versus maybe our Protestant brothers and sisters? Because in a way, we don't have a sign up that says, hey, come here, this is where we all are. But maybe that's okay. I don't know. I'm just interested in hearing what you think about that.
Yeah, it does present a particular challenge for all the reasons that we've already talked about, to have that space, to have that respite really on Sunday morning from all of the racism and discrimination that we have to deal with all the other days and hours of our lives. But one of the things that I, spend a lot of time thinking about is, if all of the Black folks, if all of the Asian Americans, if all of the Latinos we're all in our own churches, then the church, broadly speaking, can kind of distinguish itself and escape from having to deal with these issues of racism that exist in our church, because an idea of if we don't see it, then we don't have to deal with it, and we can pretend that it doesn't exist.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why being together matters, because then it forces all of us to confront these issues, and with the realization that those of us that are from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, we approach them and need to confront them in different ways. But then again, having that space, having that identity affirmation is so incredibly important. And it's something that our Protestant brothers and sisters who worship in the historically Black church denominations have. But mind you, there are plenty of Black Protestants in predominantly white denominations as well.
Exactly. So, no, I love what you say there. And, so much of, in your title, mission is in there. And one of the things we're doing here in Chicago, we have something called Renew My Church. St. Francis of Assisi heard Jesus tell him, rebuild my church. So we named our movement here, our spiritual movement, Renew My Church. The first part of that was a structural readjustment, which meant that we had a number of disproportionate unifications, we call them here in the Black Catholic community, and we had significant closures. But as we think about mission, one of the things we're trying to think about is, well, what does it really mean for how we bring new people, the new generation, into the church? And so there's a lot of thinking going in around, what it means to accompany people. And it's one heart at a time and so forth. And it's really thinking like the early apostles did. They didn't have a lot of buildings necessarily, obviously. The Pope speaks about this all the time, Pope Francis. But they were missionary. And really we have to kind of almost like reawaken that muscle in ourselves, particularly as Black Catholics, because we're so dispersed, because there are fewer kind of outward signs of our presence in our cities. It's going to be more on us as disciples of Christ to individually go out and welcome people, to accompany people, and bring them into our faith community, whether that's a virtual community or ultimately to, obviously the celebration of the Eucharist in a church somewhere, whether we're a minority or the majority in that parish. So mission is a focus. So I wonder how, just as we close here, just how you think about mission in this new age that we're in, where we're a little more dispersed, kind of what your thoughts are about how we can be more missionary as a Black Catholic community.
Yeah, and that's very important. And, we have to be more intentional about it because, in Catholic higher ed where I work, we have to be intentional about mission. We can't depend on it just to happen anymore. That we, we'll have liturgies on campus and the rest will take care of itself. Right. No, we have to make mission a part of everything that we do, whether it's anti-racism, whether it's curriculum, whether it's all of that. And so broadly speaking, the church broadly speaking, we have to do that as well. And, especially with the loss of so many Catholic schools were often a way that, especially in urban areas where people came were introduced to the church and came into the church. So,
Right.
so not having that as well, have to be intentional about the work, doing the work in capital letters, so the work of anti-racism and justice,
Sure.
and being upfront about that and making that a part of everything that we do.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tia Noel Pratt. It's such a delight to speak with you. We'll have to have you back sometime because a lot more to unpack. Thanks for joining us today on Chicago Catholic. Remember, you can catch our original Catholic programming every day on WNDZ, 7:50 a.m. from 8 to 9 a.m. And we are streaming whenever you like on our YouTube channel, Catholic Chicago. Have a great day, everyone.
The cemetery